they got the idea of buying a submarine from World War I and taking it to the Century of Progress, which was the World's Fair, in effect, in Chicago, I think in 1933. So they bought the submarine for practically nothing. And they figured, the average guy from Omaha was going to his first World's Fair, get into a submarine for a quarter or something, that they'd pay it. So they hauled it from Florida, wherever they got. They hauled it to Chicago, and then they got into Chicago, and they were hauling a submarine down the streets of Chicago, and it was creating traffic problems like nobody could imagine. So a cop came over, and he said to Ben, he says, "Where do you think you guys are going with a submarine?" And Ben says, "Well, I don't." He says, "You'll have to talk to my partner, Mr. Capone." The cop says, "You're on, just keep going." And that was Ben Rosner. And then Leo Simon died. And when he died in 1967 or so, Ben Rosner kept delivering half the profits to his widow, who was incredibly rich, of course, being Mo Annenberg's firstborn daughter. I think Mo had nine girls in a row before Walter came along. The 10th, I may be off by one, but anyway, I went to this fancy apartment, and anyway, Ben kept her in for half the deal, and he had her sign the rent checks, just so she would look like she was doing something in this business. And she didn't need the money, obviously, but he just felt he was obligated once his partner Leo died. And then she started criticizing him. And at that point, Ben went to his lawyer, or was her lawyer actually, Will Feldsteiner. I don't know whatever happened to Will, but he gave me a call because Ben wanted to call me because he wanted me to buy it. And he wanted me, if I bought it, he'd be rid of the ex-partner's wife, and he had me and Charlie come back, and we went to Will Feldsteiner's office, and Ben says, "I'll work till the end of the year, and that's all. But I'll sell you this thing for $6 million, and it had $2 million of cash and a couple of million of real estate and a couple of million of operating earnings." It was just crazy. But he felt if he was getting a lousy price, she was taking a half of the lousy price for half the money. So he looked at me at some point. Charlie, you describe the rest of it. Look at it.
He said, "I heard here you're the fastest draw in the West." He says, "Draw."
We're in a New York lawyer's office.
Yeah.
And this guy he's selling his baby, and he told us he was leaving. I got Charlie on the side. I said, if this guy leaves at the end of the year, you can throw away every psychology book that's ever been written. I mean, it isn't going to happen. So we bought it, and we lived happily ever after with Ben. And one time, he was taking me over to see a property we had in Brooklyn. And along the way, I said, "Ben, I promised you I wouldn't interfere in the business when we started." And he knew a but was coming. And he just said, "Thank you, Warren." And then shut me up. He was a lot of fun. We had so many Ben Rosner stories, but now you've heard one that hasn't been published before.
Charlie, in 2022, you used phrases like really massively stupid, massive kind of ignorance, and crazy to describe what you said was the 30% of Americans hesitant to submit themselves to untested mRNA COVID gene therapy. Do you stand behind those quotes today?
Yeah, sure.
Well, we got time for one more then before lunch. Becky?
Okay. Thought I was out, but let's see. How about, let's see here.
Gonna be how about lunch pretty soon, but
No, okay, I've got one for you.
There's been some tension in the economic relationship of the United States and China. I think that tension has been wrongly created on both sides. I think we're equally guilty of being stupid. If there's one thing we should do, it's get along with China. And we should have a lot of free trade with China in our mutual interest. And I just can't imagine. It's just so obvious. There's so much safety and so much creativity that's possible. Think of what Apple has done by engaging in a partnership with China as a big supplier. It's been good for Apple and good for China. That's the kind of business we ought to be doing with China, and more of it. And with everything that increases the tension between the two companies is stupid, 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 and ought to be stopped on each side. And each side ought to respond to the other side's stupidity with reciprocal kindness. That's my view.
And it creates one enormous problem, of course, which is that you have the two superpowers of the world, and they know they have to get along with each other. Either one can destroy the other. And they're going to be competitive with each other. But part of it is trying, always in a game like that, is trying to judge how far you can push the other guy without them reacting wrong. And, if either side is a bully in some ways, they can get away with it to an extent because the alternative would drive them both into destruction. But if they push it too far, they increase the probability that something really does go wrong. So it's one of those game theory dilemmas. But you really need the leader of both countries, and you need the populace to understand at least the general situation in which these countries are going to operate over the next century, and know that some leader that promises too much can get you in a hell of a lot of trouble. And that you've got one kind of a system that gets its leader one way, and you got another system that gets its leader another way. And keeping either side from trying to play the game too hard, and thinking the other side will go along, it's like playing chicken, and driving toward a cliff. So it is, if you got any diplomacy skills, persuasive skills, or anything like that, you really want people that will convince the other country as well as his own or her own country that this is what we're engaged in. We've got to do it right. We won't give away the store, but we won't try and take the whole store either. We're just at the beginning of this, unfortunately. We've learned what the situation was. It used to be the Soviet, and mutually assured destruction was our policy then, and that kept a lot of things from happening, but it also came with a very, very, very close call with Cuba. And these are not, these are different games than existed hundreds of years ago. You could, Britain might rule the seas, or France or Spain, but now you're playing with a game that you can't really make a huge mistake in. And I think that should be, the better that's understood in both countries, the more the leaders feel that their citizenry does understand that, the better off we'll be. And that a lot of demography, or a lot of inflammatory speaking, but a lot of authoritarian action. I mean, it all carries its dangers, and the world has stumbled through the years post-1945 with a lot of close calls in the nuclear arena. And now we've got pandemics, and we've got cyber and a whole bunch of other things. So we've got more tools of destruction than the world's ever had. And it's imperative that China and the United States both understand what the game is and understand that you can't push too hard. But both places are going to be competitive, and both can prosper. That's what really is. That's the vision that is out there, that China will have a more wonderful country, the United States will have a more wonderful country, and the two are not just compatible, they're almost imperative in terms of what's going to happen in the next 100 years or so. And I think that the leaders of both countries have got an important job in having that understood, and not to do inflammatory things. And we'll see whether the luck that has taken us from 1945 to present holds out, and I think we can affect, to some extent, that luck.